So, as of today, there are about 20 of the pack-in games that have been confirmed for the Sega Genesis Mini. Again, I keep wanting to call it the Classic. It's not the Sega Genesis Classic. It's the Sega Genesis Mini, which is Sega's answer to the Nintendo's and PlayStation's kind of mini emulation consoles that have the bundled in, packaged in games. And of course, you knew that eventually it was just a matter of time before Sega jumped on the boat. So as of right now, what we know is there are going to be 40 titles. And of the 40, we have 20 confirmed. And actually, let me pull up some information here. So it's going to drop September 19th of this year. So that is going to be right around the time. Obviously, they wanted to do a holiday window. So they want to hit that holiday season. This is going to be going in right around the Black Friday shopping, which is always, a huge deal. So you could probably expect to pick these up for some kind of crazy discount, because that's kind of what they're counting on. Then again, maybe not, because you know what? I remember the first year I think the Xbox One came out, or maybe it was the Xbox One X I'm thinking of. Yeah, I wanted to upgrade my Xbox One to an X, and I figured, well, you know what? Black Friday's coming up this year. I'll just, I'll wait and I'll get a crazy Black Friday deal, because those deals are always really good. Problem is, there was no Black Friday deal for the Xbox at that time, because, and this is probably something Microsoft works out with the retailers, and I assume it might be the same with Sega, where they basically say, look, this hardware is new, it's just on the market for a couple months, you can't already start slashing prices and then doing discounts yet. Is that going to be the case for the Sega Genesis Mini? I don't know, but I know it's due to launch September 19th. The pre-orders are setting at $79.99, so that's 80 big ones for what is essentially a shrunken down, teeny tiny Genesis box. It's going to be about this big. That's exactly the same as what the NES Classic is, and I haven't seen a PlayStation Classic. I don't even know does Sony call it the PlayStation Classic? I'm not 100% sure about that, but all the consoles are about the same. I think, like I said, I've never actually seen the PlayStation 1 in person, but they're all essentially the same. Genesis is going to be about the same. It's going to come packaged in with 40 games. It's going to be plug and play. It'll have your classic 3-button controller. It's going to be USB powered adapter, HDMI, of course, because you're going to have to run out to the HD TVs, because none of us are rolling with any CRTs anymore, unless you're a collector and you have a game room set up and you're down with that kind of thing. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about the console itself, and really the idea of the console, and whether or not it's going to be a success. And there's 3 big hurdles that I think is going to get in its way, because it's not surprising at all that Sega would roll with a Genesis Mini, essentially an emulation box of 40 packed-in games, because we've already seen that there's a market for that. It's not only among collectors; it's people who just want to play these games and don't want to have a lot of hassle or fuss over trying to collect the games on their own or do it digitally or whatever the case may be. But will the Sega Genesis Mini, and this is the big question, will it actually do well this holiday season? Like I said, we only know half the library so far, but the Sega Genesis library is about, I want to say it's around 600 games, 700 games, something like that, in that ballpark. Don't quote me on that, but it's generally what it is. So they narrowed it down to 40. Is those 40 games enough or so appealing that it's going to sell this console on its own merits? There's a lot of X factors here. Now, the first hurdle that I think people have to think about whether or not the Sega Genesis Mini is going to be a success is this enough of a niche concept? Or rather, I guess I should say, is it too much of a niche concept to be marketable, to be successful in a way that Sega would consider to be profitable? It's of course going to sell. It's going to sell some. But is it going to be a success in the eyes of, profits, like a Nintendo Mini was. That thing was sold out forever. You could not get your hands on it whatsoever. Well, here's a couple things that may prevent it from being a success on that level. And to be honest, if I had to say so, I'd say it's probably not going to be that successful. It'll be moderately successful, and here's why. Number one, the Sega Genesis Mini is packing in 40 games from its 600 to 700 games library. And the issue with that is, Sega's not really offering anything here that has not already been offered in a million different flavors leading up till now. Now, if you have followed the previous generations, and I'm not talking just Xbox One and PS4, I'm talking 360, PlayStation 3, Xbox One, PlayStation 2, going all the way back. Sega has never had a problem licensing out its games. So there have been a ton of Sega Genesis compilations already released. I mean, you can probably play way more than 40 games for the Sega Genesis on your classic consoles. If you have a Xbox 360 and an Xbox One, let's just say you have like one line of consoles. Let's say you're a PlayStation person or an Xbox person, and you only have that hardware. You're still good, because if most of it's backwards compatible, and there have been so many compilation games released that with so many, a variety of so many different Sega games, you're not going to have a problem getting your Sega Genesis fix if you don't want to get into the emulation world. If you just want to do it on your console just for fun, and let's say you have a few core Sega Genesis games that you want to play, like your Sonics and your, whatever the case may be. Really Sonic is the go-to mascot for Sega Genesis, but the other big thing about Sega Genesis is it was huge on sports games. So it didn't have a ton of kind of iconic flagship stuff that was only on Genesis. It was usually ports that was on Genesis and Super Nintendo and things like that. But the point is, whatever your favorite Genesis game is, even if you're not a Sonic fan, you probably already have access to it on one of those compilations. It's very easy to get, and to be honest, because they're older now, you can probably go to GameStop or some used game store or a flea market and pick it up for $4 or $5 or something crazy like that. So that's the first issue they're going to run into. This is not exactly, like, what's the appeal here besides a collector or someone who doesn't have one of those compilation discs already? Why am I going to buy a pack-in set of 40 games that I essentially already have in so many other different varieties? The second thing is kind of what I was just talking about, how if you're a Sega Genesis fan, you probably know Sonic. But if you're not a Genesis fan, that probably means you didn't grow up with the system. Now, Genesis obviously was part of the whole console war back in the 90s. I don't have to tell anybody that's my age or older about, how important Genesis was to that period in gaming. But if you don't know the Genesis, or maybe you're just a little bit, maybe you're just you caught the tail end of it and you're actually on the next generation after that, maybe you're more of a PlayStation 1 person, or you got into the CD-ROM era just as it was starting, which is exactly where the Genesis cutoff point was. And that's kind of, they tried to jump into that with the Sega CD and it didn't work out. So the next iteration of that is when the CD-ROM based generation really blew up. Maybe that's where your gaming roots kind of dug in. So you're not as familiar with the Genesis, or maybe you know about it, but you just don't have any love for, like, if you see these games in this window right here, I played every single one of those games. Now, I just pulled that randomly from the main Genesis Mini site because I want a little screenshot representing some of the games. So I clipped out that randomly. But I can tell you, just looking at that, I have played 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. At least 6, maybe 7 of those 8 games I know I've played because I played the Genesis. I was a Genesis fan. I had a Genesis. I played it for years, and I still love retro gaming. I still go back and play as much retro, if not more retro, than I do modern stuff. So I'm a fan. If you're not a fan, and the average gamer who's, let's face it, my age group is starting to age out of the prime marketing kind of window, or the chunk of people that they're looking to market to, it's getting younger and younger. So the average young gamer doesn't have the attachment to the Genesis that they, like I would. Now you might say, well, that's kind of silly because the NES Classic did really well, even among younger gamers. and it's even older than the Genesis. Well, yeah, that's true, but the problem is Nintendo is still a marketable brand. It's still out there. It's you still recognize Mario and all, and just literally every one of the big Nintendo brands is still there, and the Nintendo is still a thing. You have the Switch, and you have the 3DS, and you have everything that is still marketing. So it has kept that brand alive. It's kept those characters and those franchises alive. So that was different. Plus the idea of retro NES, whether you're a retro collector or just a collector in general, the NES will always be the epitome of retro collecting, at least until the younger gamers start to get a little bit older. So it's more of a novelty just in name value alone than the Genesis. The Genesis does not have that nostalgia built into it and that kind of pop culture level of recognition. So that's the second hurdle. The third hurdle, which I kind of touched on earlier, is the fact that you're getting 40 packed in games and they want you to pay $80. Now, unless you are a collector or someone that is just looking to quickly play some games easily that you can just plug and play up to your TV, or maybe you're buying this for if you're an aunt or uncle buying this for your younger niece and nephews, and you think this would be a cool gift, that's fine. I get that, and that'll be a decent chunk of the profits that finally roll in. But there's a lot of people out there that look at that and say, you want me to pay $40, or you want me to pay $80 for 40 games for a Genesis Mini, which as far as we can tell is not expandable unless you mod it or doing something crazy. It's a one and done purchase, and then what you get is what you get. When for 20 plus years, the emulation market or scene has blown up and continued to grow to where you can actually, and of course I'm not suggesting you do this because the ethics of it is a gray area for sure. But the fact of the matter is, whether I'm judging the right or wrong of it, it's a thing. Emulation is a thing. People have entire Genesis collections with every single game released in a folder that they can load into their emulator and play on a TV or throw it on a Raspberry Pi or whatever the case may be, or a modded console. And a lot of them are already playing the entire Genesis collection for nothing. And you want them to turn around and spend $80 on a console. Now, again, I get it. Sega is not marketing this to those people. But the fact of the matter is, you have to accept two things about that. Number one, that's going to take a huge chunk out of the appeal of this, because it's not a must-have thing. You're not offering anything unique that's going to appeal to people that already have not only these 40 games, but every other game. And also not just the US games that, you have collections that were released for the Mega Drive overseas, and you have all the homebrew and hacks, and all of that opens up to that market, that idea of expandability. That's going to be a huge problem for people. Like, I would say at least 10 to 20% of Sega Genesis fans already emulate the console. I think that's a pretty fair estimate. Now, don't underestimate the importance of emulation. And believe me when I tell you, if it was not for the emulation scene all these years, and companies like Sega and Nintendo and these other companies on the record will tell you that emulation is wrong, it's illegal, it's stealing, don't download ROMs because that's stealing, and all these things. And you know what? I'm not here to weigh in on that in this stream anyway. I'm not here to litigate that, the morals of that. But what I am going to tell you is, make no mistake about it, if it was not for the popularity of the emulation scene of the last 20 plus years, you would not have an NES Classic. You would not have a Sega Genesis Mini. What that has done is shown the marketing people they're not in charge of creative content. Their job is to make money for the stockholders, bring money into the company. They saw a market for this. They saw that there is still an interest in retro gaming through collectors and people just wanting to play. And that's why you get these consoles. So it's it's a weird double-edged sword. A lot of the emulation community is not going to go out and spend $80 on a pack-in game of 40 games that they already have, but it's because of them that everyone else is getting this console. So it's kind of a fun dichotomy. But I will say this. I wish Sega all the luck in the world. I want more stuff like this on the market. I want to see this be successful. And you know what? I'm telling you right now, if you're a Sega Genesis fan, or even if you think it's just a passing fad, it's just a novelty, a niche thing, I don't care. Go out and buy it, or buy it for someone else, or buy it for someone that you know as a gift. Because the more success retro products like this have on the market, the more that retro fans like myself and all of you who are, into retro gaming, it's only going to help us. It's only going to help grow our community, expand it, and it's only going to be a good thing for everybody.